I'm pretty much completely settled in to my new apartment here in Main Street Life, and already it's safe to say that my world is completely different. I feel more part of the city now, more part of Greater Johannesburg, you know, and my whole lifestyle is now different.
How many people have you got living here?
Living here about 500,
Okay.
and then working here about another, I don't know, maybe 1,000.
On this episode of the show, we'll be looking at urban renewal.
Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneurial Edge. I'm Chris Bishop. Now this week we have a story of youth, fire and ambition.
Downtown Johannesburg has at night the appearance of an abandoned movie set. The high crime rate keeps the streets empty and people out of the inner city.
Talk Radio 702.
He's just 29 years old and he owns 35 buildings in Africa's richest city.
He's a property developer. He's involved in an amazing initiative to revitalise part of Joburg's central business district.
We're talking about Jonathan Maboneng, young entrepreneur who is leading the regeneration of one of Africa's great cities, Johannesburg.
We'll be coming to you from the Maboneng precinct in downtown Johannesburg,
It's called the Maboneng precinct.
a place that was known for its crime and grime in recent years.
The streets are lit, there's 24-hour security, and there are entrepreneurs everywhere.
This is a drawing that illustrates what the current existing neighborhood is, which is the model that we showed you. We also have plans to extend further northwards.
It's the site of industrial buildings, some functioning, some abandoned, and he's busy converting them in an imaginative, visionary way.
So Maboneng, I guess, is an urban neighborhood. It's a community of like-minded people, artists, entrepreneurs, bankers, lawyers, people from all walks of life that have come together with a common interest in engaging with urban Johannesburg. So the area that we call Maboneng now is kind of really different from other parts of the city. So the city, like most cities, is divided into different pockets. And Maboneng is previously it was an industrial area, as opposed to most of the Johannesburg city was actually old office blocks, old residential blocks. Maboneng was old factories and warehouses. You know, I was living in kind of suburban Johannesburg, like most middle and upper income people in Joburg.
In Johannesburg, there are high walls and bigger properties, and generally people are quite cut off from their neighbors and each other.
And really living the lives, people in their 20s and 30s, living lives that people would normally be living in their 50s and 60s.
I think there are a lot of issues that filter down from the apartheid days and have kind of created a lot of fear.
In words like Joburg being known as like a dangerous city or space, people are very afraid in coming back into the city, you know.
So George is a old boxing legend from Hillbrow that a lot of Joburgers have come across. Many artists have actually engaged with him over the last possibly 10 years, I think.
I was Jim here for 5 years now, but there are more than 36 boxes. In 2000, I just said no, I want to go to stay in Ibo when I faced challenges. It was not a shift in 2000 I can't.
I guess for a lot of people, Hillbrow is a symbolic place for crime in Johannesburg. I was born, bred and buttered in Johannesburg. I grew up in a nearby suburb called Trois, and yeah, I've always been in the inner city itself. I'm an entrepreneur within the Maboneng precinct itself. We do inner city tours that venture into the streets of Joburg. Right now we're walking through Hillbrow, engaging and experiencing it, than from what we read from books or what people perceive it out to be. I think we want to establish basically a connection where we feel very humble and chilled about it. So that's why we're taking a pocket camera as opposed to big materials.
Well, you know, we're from Berlin in Germany, and Berlin also was plotted. So there's this derelict east that has been rebuilt over the past 20 years. Joburg is actually quite similar to that, I think. A lot of changes happening. And, well, we don't have chicken in Berlin.
I've owned this hardware shop since 1991. It's 21 years now. It's situated just around the corner from the Maboneng Rejuvenation Precinct. There was a period of lawlessness, of great lawlessness in this area. During that period, I lost 7 vehicles in 3 years through hijacking and theft. There were numerous break-ins. Many of my neighbours who were less fortunate were robbed.
Joburg Inner City was really intended for 2 prime purposes. It was the site of what was called white capital. It was really the place where high-end business took place, where the financial institutions were, where the really fancy department stores were located. And on the other hand, it was intended to be kind of the flats where young couples moved into as their first homes.
During apartheid, black people weren't allowed to be residents in the Johannesburg CBD. This was due to a whole number of policies, such as the Urban Areas Act, which was implemented in the 50s or 60s. The Urban Areas Act created certain neighborhoods based on race.
At the end of the 80s, white people started to move out, and at the same time, black people who'd been living mainly in locations, townships and informal settlements started to move in.
That kind of started a mindset and discourse around the CBD being associated with crime and danger.
Had a city council who, for a range of different reasons, didn't take control of the inner city, and they left it. So, I mean, if you've got environmental health officers who are not going in, if you've got no politicians who are going in, if you've got cops who refuse to go in because they're afraid, you can start to imagine what starts to go on. It becomes a very a fertile ground to breed crime.
Gradually, more and more businesses just moved away to better and more controllable situations. Buildings became empty and abandoned. They eventually became filled with vagrants and squatters.
Okay, I got some boxers to stay. I felt that from difficult rural areas. They don't have families, so that's why they don't have money to pay. I'm helping them.
This is going to become storage. Jesus, fuck me. I mean, for me, I see absolute mess. You know, I see sewage all over the place, human sewage, you know, with no services whatsoever. All the lifts are broken, no windows. So I just see a complete mess. But I also, at the same time, see a vision of what it could become.
Okay, the buildings in the old part of Johannesburg were built especially in this area of Maboneng, were built from 1895 up to the late 50s. So the whole mentality of developers at the time was to build for the very long term, to build something permanent, done with a lot of pride, with a lot of quality, and with also artisan skills that are not even available anymore. And the counterbalance of that is that they're very, very cheap. So one gets a quality that one can't even buy with money anymore at a very, very cheap price.
Been in Main Street life for a month now, and I can't believe how much construction these guys have done.
How's it going? Hi. How are you? Do you mind explaining what this is? Okay, so this thing is effectively drilling through concrete. Yeah. Did you know I'm living here?
I heard a rumor. I've got some crazy socks.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm documenting my life in this building. I knew Jonathan, and I knew of the development, and I knew that the view on the roof was amazing. And I had an idea at the time, which I was looking to develop, which was this whole idea of this person living in an apartment, that his life was documented, and I had this idea that it was a bit of a retail component idea. But I just adapted it to the selling of apartments. And I came back to him and I said, I've got this great idea. Why don't I live in the construction site?
What Maboneng as a precinct is setting out to do is this idea of collaboration amongst artists of all sorts of disciplines.
Maboneng we've taken a phased approach. It started with Arts on Main.
Do you know Arts on Main? Have you heard of Arts on Main? Yeah, it's lots. Like events, there's artists that live there and work there.
Like who?
Have you heard of William Kentridge? The $1 million artist.
I have a studio at my house in the northern suburbs, but I was specifically looking for a larger space and needed something that had a good height to it. And this is the place I found. So it wasn't a decision saying, I need to revive this part, or I'm going to be part of reviving this part of town. It was purely saying, I need a studio space of a certain scale, and found it here.
We started with this in 2009. And it was just a space with artist studios, creative office spaces, restaurants. But it's evolved into something new, I think. I was really looking for a much bigger impact, so we started thinking about a whole neighborhood.
We looked at the Johannesburg old center, and we realized that there was some amazing buildings, architecturally, with great potential and very, very undervalued from a commercial point of view. And really that was the starting point.
And from there we developed Main Street Life, which was a residential, hotel, retail component, really focused on the creative community.
I'm a conceptual artist for a dance crew called Vintage Dance Crew, and I'm also one of the members. The last video that we shot was for the Antwoord, Fetty Pum Pum. I moved up from Soweto early last year, June, the beginning of June. I met up with a friend at Shesha. I used to work at a Nike store there, and then that's where we linked up and we're like, yeah, Main Street Live, we'd love to move in. We just clicked, and then we moved in together last year, and then it was amazing.
Main Street Live. Main Street Live.
The movement of subcultures into areas of urban renewal is in a way slightly rebellious against the history of South Africa.
We grew up in Soweto, so the fact that we were really outspoken, but not verbally, but more on how we would express ourselves with how we dress up. Just freedom of expression.
So if they move into a new area, subcultures could feel that they can now make themselves a new sense of belonging and they can create a community for themselves.
We grew under democracy, so they did fight for our freedom. So now we're free to do whatever you want to do. So you dressing up as like being different every day towards any other ordinary people, it's a blessing.
What's happened in many, many cities around the world is that as there's one kind of decay, so prices fall and it becomes possible for artists to set up studios and working spaces, whether it's in Soho initially, New York, and then Chelsea, or Berlin after the wall came down.
So like living close to places like this, like the art and main, you know, like it's cool, man, because like you can hang around with curators, with artists, with everyone that you want to work with.
So I mean, you always have a sense the boutiques, the smart shops, the fashions follow the artists. And it would be nice to think the same thing might happen in this city.
Everything? Yeah. Okay. But in building that phase, we realized that there was a much bigger demand for an entire neighborhood, and that's when I came up with the idea of Maboneng as an area.
And it's grown into over 7 completed developments we're at now. And that's everything from artist studios to galleries to entertainment spaces to residential.
It became so successful that the consequence or the impact of it went beyond itself.
So in 3 years, it's grown to a community of over 1,500 people.
So we're not talking about a massive geographic area, we're not talking about hundreds of thousands of units, but what we are talking about is a rethinking of the inner city space, bringing in what is effectively white, black, middle class into the inner city again, regenerating it in a particular kind of way. When Jonathan Lieberman talks, he says the inner city shouldn't only be a place for the poor. It should be, you know, the inner city should be a place for everybody. And I take that on board. I really do. And I think it's correct. We do need integrated communities. We need mixed use, mixed income kind of environments. And Maboneng does that. But, very big but. The problem is that the inner city is a highly complex environment. And there is not sufficient housing for the majority of poor people.
Up until now, we haven't bought any buildings that have had any residential components. So we haven't evicted anybody out of any buildings, and that's not something that I would want to try and deal with. So I've stayed away from those buildings. As I've said before, this area is different to the rest of the inner city in that it was old factory spaces and warehouse spaces, so it didn't have a big residential community.
The buildings were not used formally for housing. The buildings have been used informally for housing. And that's the issue, is that people have been able to find some kind of accommodation within these spaces. They are not great shelter. They're not in any way wonderful shelter, but they are shelter. And what they do is they allow people to have some kind of livelihood and have some kind of economic opportunity by staying in them.
Maboneng has renovated the town, but there has been discontent about it because it is too upmarket, too expensive, and it's not marketed at the local people who live here.
It's like maybe America or wherever, I don't know. A lot of white people around here totally changed. Exactly what I was seeing.
Yeah, if I afford it, I stay there. But now I can't afford it, so it's not easy to stay there.
Yeah, because I heard that they only want to take all this place around, maybe all this building around. They want to overtake this building.
With us coming into the area and uplifting the space, certainly the buildings will become more expensive, and I think that's a natural progression of an area.
I think where the main failing is actually in the state. I don't think the failing is necessarily in the private sector. They're there to do business. That's absolutely fine. But what's not happening is in the moments in which people like Jonathan are redeveloping the Maboneng precinct, the city is not coming in parallel and developing sufficient social housing and kind of lower income housing to ensure that the people who are being evicted or the people who won't be taken care of by the private sector have somewhere to go.
Hi, this is the bioscope. We're involved in something that's happening in the precinct. It's an open air screening just around the corner from the bioscope. full-time, I'm one of the owners of the Bioscope and Chalkboard, which are on the ground floor of Main Street Life. The Bioscope is what we refer to as Johannesburg's only truly independent cinema. I mean, there's certainly an easy way to describe how Maboneng is developed. It's classic Joburg that something like this could be developed so quickly. What would usually take 4 times the amount of time anywhere else in the world, you can get these kinds of things done very quickly in Joburg.
I decided that I wanted a boxing gym at the top of, just above the hotel, and I asked around about who would be a good boxing coach, and his name came up, and it happened really organically, and from there he started having classes on the roof, and that group of people just started growing and growing, and now he's again another member of the community.
My school was around, I could say 15 minutes away from Maboneng, so we used to walk here like every morning, every afternoon. There was nothing happening here, like nothing at all, no skate ramps, like nothing at all. The streets have changed like drastically now, because now I'd really emphasize on drastically, because it was like really trashy warehouse, and
my office is like out on the streets, which I really dig, you know. So yeah, it's like everything is just like constant and very hip, and it's happening, it's out there. It feels very genuine as well, you know.
People are friendly, criminal elements are not welcome. People in the street, if they see somebody they don't like, they'll come in and they'll tell us there's somebody here we don't like. Won't you go and see or call the police or do something? And the criminals find they're not comfortable, so they leave.
For me, Maboneng really represents the future of South Africa. It's how we all want to live. It's the way we should be living.
Maboneng is going to grow. It's going to grow along a very similar philosophy of having a very diverse, very interesting, very quirky, and dynamic community.
I think Maboneng, it seems to be expanding both in the sense of the initial developers continuing buying buildings and reviving them and changing their function, and creating a space in which it becomes more and more comfortable for people from all over the city to either work or to live.
Somebody needs to take this downtown regeneration into a whole nother level. 5 buildings isn't gonna create enough change that we're all looking for. It's gonna need to be 50, maybe 100 buildings. It's gonna need to be an entire neighborhood that sets the example for that environment that we're all seeking.
Check it out. Is that the view? This is Joburg, baby!